I want to welcome everybody to our session today. This is part 2 of our wonderful new series, the ZACAPA Experience. And I'm joined today by the wonderful National Ambassador for Zacapa and co-founder of SpeedRack, Miss Lynnette Marrero. I'm just going to pull up our presentation here. And hopefully you can all still see us on the screen, although we do have our presentation up. So the first session that you witnessed a couple of weeks ago was Lynnette as well, but joined by our master blender for Zacapa Rum, the one and only Lorena Vasquez, who may or may not make a surprise appearance today. She's waiting somewhere in Zoom land for the right opportunity to pounce. And so it's wonderful to have you all today. We're going to talk a bit about the mixology side of things now that we've covered the magic of Zacapa and how it gets from that beautiful cane into the bottle. I'm your host. Hello, my name is Lauren Mote. I'm the Diageo Reserve Global Cocktailian, also the Global Ambassador for the World Class Program. I have a long list of things here that were pulled from my bio. I'll spare you and not read you any of them, but I'll just leave them up on the screen just for a moment. I've been a bartender for over 20 years and from Canada originally, and now live in Amsterdam. And I work with the global team for Zacapa, as well as lots of other wonderful brands in our Diageo Reserve portfolio. And of course, Lynnette, we're going to spend some time talking through Lynnette's amazing accolades here. Lynnette, as I mentioned, is the national mixologist for Zacapa Rum in the US, but definitely no stranger to travel and has worked with bartenders all over the world with a special passion for elevating and celebrating women in our industry. She's also the co-founder of SpeedRack, a competition that was developed by women for women as part of a prevention program for breast cancer in the US and globally. So that's an amazing achievement. Also an incredible bar director, bartender, and well-decorated award winner, philanthropy, you name it. She's just a wonderful human. And we're here today talking about Zacapa, and how we wanted to elevate this conversation today is talk a little bit about how we use this now in drinks. Now, everyone must have an idea of how they'd like to use rum in drinks or how they've used rum in drinks in the past, but what we'd love for you to do is almost put that to the side for now and just experience what Zacapa can bring to the table for you. And what makes Zacapa so special, amongst many things, is the fact that it's a beautiful rum that's a blend between rums 6 to 23 years, comes from the beautiful Guatemalan terroir from a couple of different locations. We are very passionate about cane to glass and how we sort of develop that wonderful story. And its flavor, and also I guess the different locations where we grow the sugarcane, where the sugar refinery is, how we navigate that fresh pressed sugarcane juice. But in fact, it has this incredible flavor profile that is floral, it's caramelly, it's just such a stunning liquid to begin with. And from there, we send this up to the house above the clouds. After we do the distillation, it goes to the house above the clouds, where it rests for a certain period of time at 23, oops, there's Grace. Hi, Grace. At 2,300 meters above sea level is this incredible climate. It's a little bit cooler, it's a little bit more moist, and it allows the rum to just really gently sleep amongst different barrels, which contribute to the incredible flavor that gives Zacapa all of that incredible character that you go on to make those great drinks. That's why the simple drink like the Manhattan or the old fashioned or anything, a stirred, easy drink, anything where you normally would have reached for a high-end bourbon or a Scotch whiskey, a single malt, this is where Zacapa perfectly fits, because the way in which we make the rum and the way in which Lorena Vasquez carefully crafts and blends these different rums together, this is what gives that final character, making it almost impossible to make a bad drink, you know? And we could spend a long time talking about this, and I know Lynnette and Lorena already did, and you're going to get a little taste of, I guess, of that education and sort of that aspirational storytelling every time you tune in to one of these Zacapa Experience sessions, because it isn't just a rum. as Lorena always says, being a blender and getting to touch and taste and smell, this is a way of life, creating flavor and creating happiness in the recipient that has that bottle, making that drink, having it neat on ice, whatever it might be. That's the passion that really goes into each bottle. And our Solera system, of course, the multitude of cask types that we talked about, they're blending in the same way as the Spanish created the Sistema Solera over 500 years ago to maintain and blend sherry wines, specifically in southern Spain. And taking that technology and that idea is more than just putting rum into a cask and waiting 12 years. This is letting them rest in different types of casks for different periods of time, and then blending them together and then allowing that blend to rest and carry on. And that's what gives that signature flavor to Zacapa, which is not easy to achieve, and why Lorena's job is so challenging, and also why this rum is such a celebration. I'm going to pass it over to Lynnette now, because we're going to talk about some tasting notes. So hi, Lynnette.
Hi, thank you, Lauren, for that awesome intro and getting the stage set for our Zacapa afternoon. So as we talked about last time, I think what was really great when we talked, had all that wonderful access to Lorena, talking about the spirit, how it's crafted. And from this point, I think when we really talk about it and see how she really creates in the bottle through her technique of using the different barrels, creates almost a cocktail within that bottle, right? So it's blending the different aromas, the sweeter aromas, the things that might be a little more bitter, with high notes, fruit notes, floral notes, all those kind of things. And what we really got from her conversation was how the choice of the different barrels and how she treats the different oak is the big key to why Zacapa is so nuanced and the things that we can reach into. So I think when we talk about, when Lauren said, the cocktails, the old fashioned and the Manhattan, when we think about those cocktails, they are those style of cocktails because they're meant to highlight the base spirit. And then like the way you tweak with different elements is how you innovate on those drinks. So starting here with our what I love about this chart is that you get the color development on the bottom, which gives you just a great visual of what each of the different staves and the oak are bringing to the character and color and how the rum progresses. But starting again with that first, with that ex-American whiskey, uncharred, just taking it after it's previously held bourbon whiskey and seeing what we get from there. So again, you're getting here those vanillas, apricots, rice figs, almonds, caramelized pineapple wood, all those different things that are kind of left over after having bourbon in there. But the next step is probably, and Lorena talks about this cask because, when we add fire to that cask after it's now held the bourbon and then it's held our first rums for 3 years, recharring those casks and the lignin and the chemicals that release bring out toasted almond and amplify those dry fruits and all of those different and all those different aromas that come out. And then you bring out other things like cinnamon and spice notes and toasted coconut, nutmeg, and cacao. As we move into then our next, other things that come from that smokiness is that chocolate, caramelized fruits, plums, and then we get into like those really ripe notes. And then as we move into the European oaks with our sherry casks, we get with Oloroso, again, a drier style, oxidative sherry. You're getting, again, toasted almond comes out more but in a different way. We're getting coffee notes. We're amplifying those raisins, but now you also get things like dates and other Mediterranean fruits and amplifying that fig. And of course, some of that sherry wine note does impart. And then the PX goes deeper into like rich prune and soft raisin. And then those toffee kind of notes, little dessert notes. And then for XO, which goes into ex-cognac, you're going to get more things like sandalwood, which are some of these other aromas. And you really realize that like there are so many different, a lot of this lemon zest, orange zest, those also come in through the other aromas, but the wood is giving these flavors. So you do have in 23 really beautiful citrus notes, at some point some floral notes. And those are some of the things that we play around with. You can go to the next slide. When we are talking about our cocktail creation. So again, this is just a refresher of your the 3 main varieties of the Zacapa rum, which barrels they're aged in, so you can kind of connect the dots from before of what's going to be amplified. and how to play around with these spirits then in these very clean style of creating cocktails, which today we're going to focus on kind of, you know, if we go to the next slide, the key that we've been realizing with mixing cocktails is, you know, some of the things have come back. I know we had a conversation, and it's funny that, you know, now everyone can make an old fashioned. Old fashions are a call, whereby, you know, 5, 6 years ago, you would never have people really walking up into a bar and just calling the old fashioned. And the old fashioned has broken out of just being a rye or bourbon cocktail. It has been expanded to many different spirits, and Zacapa is uniquely suited to shine in that cocktail based on everything we saw. It's so connected to the wood, and there's all those aromas. So when you're taking a cocktail that's so simple, you know, it's our spirits, our bitters, our sugar, and then citrus and the ice, you're going to play around with those little elements. So we've done a bunch of varieties. This is our smoked cinnamon old fashioned, which was inspired by the Edición Negra. Edición Negra really brings out more of those smoked notes and amplifies those things. Also, you get more of, I found, the spices. So with here, I was leaning into, all right, well, cinnamon with that kind of like really nice smoky barbecue kind of aroma you're getting in those beautiful smoked notes. I wanted to amplify that. So this cocktail, I'm just, instead of using simple syrup, I'm using cinnamon syrup, and then using, you know, aromatic bitters, which also come with a lot of those different notes that are already in there and things that are complementary, you know, baking spices, and then using our lemon and orange oils for bringing out more of the citrus notes, and then garnishing this with that smoked cinnamon stick, which is part of the appeal of, like, you know, connecting that wonderful concept of volcano and the smoke and everything that Edición Negra brings into our world. Our next variation on our old fashioned is kind of leading into where I'm thinking right now, because right now here it's fall and I'm getting pears and apples. It's not fall yet. I'll give you end of summer, but I'm getting apples and pears in my CSA right now. And so this is kind of some places where I wanted to go, where you can play around with, you know, not just using a sugar source all the time, but kind of working with your spirituous cocktails where you can use a liqueur in place of that sugar to amplify some notes. So I use a really great local pear liqueur for this that's made across the river in the Hudson Valley. That there is some beautiful, you can use things like Port Williams, and depending on what kind of pear liqueur, it's going to change this, but it's going to bring out, again, a lot of those baking spices in the Zacapa, and also make you kind of like really taste a lot of those notes in there. And then here again, using aromatic bitters and then some walnut bitters. And the walnut bitters here, again, I was thinking, you know, we talk a lot about food and pairing with Zacapa, which you'll hear in our next section. But for here, walnuts and kind of all that nuttiness, I wanted to bring a warm nuttiness to it that's also amplified by our Oloroso sherry cask. So the walnut bitters is that. And then again, this is just a simple drink, but it looks really beautiful with your slice of pear. Our next variation that we have worked on. Yep.
Before you jump to the next one, I just wanted to make mention, don't frantically start writing recipes down, because this whole deck that you're watching right now will be available for download on Diageo Bar Academy. So stay tuned for that. And if you're joining the session today, then you've registered your email. So we'll definitely make sure that you know when the deck is available to download, and you'll have all these recipes as well. The session that Lynnette and Lorena did a couple of weeks ago will be available this week. And Lynnette, to the next one.
All this and to connect this. So, right. So right now we're going through it, and I know that there's lots of variations on old fashions. And so we're going through these to hopefully spark some inspiration for fall. Our signature old fashioned, so this is the one that we've landed on for 23. And I think with Julio Cabrera from Miami, who we all love, I think what really inspired us and set us down this pathway of Zacapa and old fashions was a lot inspired by just this simple thought process of taking the Zacapa and saying, this is what a signature old fashioned for this spirit means. And I think that's a really great way to think about old fashions, is that you're tasting that spirit, and each one is going to shine in the ways that you subtly adjust things. So here with the Centenario rum, again, we want just a little bit of simple syrup. We're using always like about a quarter ounce. So really a little light touch because you don't want to overwhelm any of these old fashions, which too much viscosity or sweetness, because really, again, Lorena's made such a balanced spirit that I find within itself, sweet, tart, spice, acidity, everything is very balanced. So I just want to add a little touch before I'm going to add the bittering agent. Again, we use aromatic bitters here, but then the real highlight here was Julio really gearing towards chocolate bitters. And I know Lauren is a big fan of chocolate bitters. The Malagansi are so good. And, you know, chocolate, it's funny here because chocolate can go so many different ways, right? We can go chocolate notes that might want to have a little more like Mexican style chocolate bitters that might have a little bit more cinnamon and some of those flavors. You want me to get some of the chocolate bitters in the market, definitely have, I find lean a little bit more towards just the nose aroma and maybe not as much on the palate. So playing around with what your chocolate bitters are like. But for us here, it is all that toasted cacao and all of those chocolate notes that we want to bring out that go with those spice notes. And then for here, the grapefruit peel is Lorena's choice on this drink because the grapefruit has a soft citrus, a floral aroma to it that underlies a lot of the things that you don't maybe notice first on Zacapa, things like rose petal and some of these other aromas that are down there. Like, I was thinking of petal, grapefruit, and rose. That makes sense. So I was like, oh my goodness, it makes sense that that connects with the Zacapa Old Fashioned because there is that little hint of that floral nature there in the aroma. And so you're amplifying that with those flavors. But this is simple and beautiful. People crave this. And then to elevate it, it's just that shaved chocolate on top, which, you know, you can have it with or without that. That's the way Julio always intended this drink. So it was kind of this like beautiful moment for your after dinner, your perfect dessert. For me, this would be my perfect dessert most times. It was a couple old fashioned. But this is the way we've decided 23 is elevated to its best aromas and positioning, and just the way that this cocktail really shines. And again, you know, it is a simple drink, yet elegantly made. It's delicious. I think if anyone can raise their hand if you ever had a bad old fashioned and you think it's nearly impossible, but I've had a bad old fashioned before. Too much water introduced that can blow out the spirit itself, too much sugar that then again, you end up this like watery cocktail that doesn't show the elegance. So again, here we're choosing to use even that larger piece of ice after stirring it. So that way it really has that beautiful integrity and everything is married together in harmony and not one flavor overdoing the others. And note, we do talk about using dark chocolate with Zacapa. Primarily, usually something above 70% cacao is usually best because again, it's that richer, darker, not that milk chocolate. So we don't really want to go into that realm on the cocktail. So this is kind of where I think that nice is dark. And so you get more of the coffee and those types of things.
Lynnette, you touched on something really interesting that I think is worth maybe just talking about for a couple of seconds, because I know there's a bunch more old fashions coming, which are such amazing combinations. But it's an interesting opportunity because everybody understands what an old fashioned is. Everybody's still asking for them. Pop culture has really helped with that. And because of the nuances and the directions that Zacapa can go, there's 500 different tasting notes. What do you think about the idea of having, you know, a venue, each venue having a signature old fashioned that speaks to the type of maybe cultural cuisine or, you know, the type of neighborhood or, you know, maybe the chef's idea or the bartender's, you know, direction that he wants to take, he or she would like to take the concept. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's awesome. I mean, a lot of our pairings, I know Chef Grace made for one of our shoots this beautiful duck breast that was seared crispy with blackberries. And I saw that dish and I was like, well, I'm like, what I want to have here is a Zacapa Old Fashioned where I'm using a fresh vanilla bean syrup, right? Because for me, it clicked in with those flavors and aromas and the kind of, you know, dish, something very classic that I wanted to have bring out more of the other notes, and that vanilla that comes with like torching, you know. So I'm also thinking like you're torching the barrel and you get that vanilla that aroma coming out. And if I can amplify that with the vanilla bean, that was the way. And we've done a lot, I think there's a lot of like ways this goes. I think when you look at, you can introduce other spice notes, like traditional spicy notes. You can introduce other smoke. I know we talked at one point, Zacapa leans really well into working with other elements. So I've even done things with like a rinse of mezcal with Zacapa old fashions, because that smoke on the nose from that other spirit that also then gives a little salinity, gives you this great contrast. So I think, yeah, it's about like, I think that's a great way for people to see, if you're going to have people stop at the bar and ask for an old fashioned, you can make one of our old fashions, very classic. At that point, I'm normally pulling like, what kind of spirit do you want? And then it can work there. But I think having your own Zacapa old fashioned that leans into your cuisine, leans into your style. And then, there's the bitters alone, you can be so innovative and creative with. And I always love rinses or dashes or different smoked elements that might, really tie into your venue. That's really interesting ways of playing around with it. And your presentation, I think, there are, like with the smoked cinnamon old fashioned, there was just something about how attractive that looks for guests to see, something like with some smoke coming around the bar, then everyone wants to know what that is, and you can smell it and it starts getting you hungry for the foods that are going to come out. I think that's a really clever way to work on your old fashioned ideation. I lean more towards looking at what chef's menu is going to be, because our cocktails pair that way. But that's a great way to go through.
Yeah, it's an amazing point. It's just really the only thing holding you back is your imagination and creativity. The old fashioned is such an amazing vessel to go in so many directions. And we have a couple of comments that I would love to share. So I reached out and I asked, tell me, everyone, what are your favorite combinations? Rum old fashioned with Zacapa. What types of flavors do you like? And so I've got definitely chocolate old fashioned from Jorge. I've got Ashley says that she tried 23 recently in an old fashioned with Angostura orange bitters and Angostura standard bitters with chamomile syrup to round it out with a bit of curacao, which sounds lovely. And another one with a split base, Zacapa 23 with bullet rye, rhubarb bitters, a bit of sugar, and black cherry garnish with a lime twist. All of those sound really good.
For the one who's wrote bullet, Zacapa 23 actually does play really well with bullet in a cocktail. I've done more Manhattan style variations where that works, and it's funny to see that DNA of like how those whiskey barrels, right, can help be a through line to connect those spirits. So working with those together, playing around in that way. Like I said, I do a lot of mezcal with Zacapa because I really like one kind of connecting two different ingredients from the same part of the world. And I like how like a mezcal rinse can bring salinity to Zacapa and then amplify smoke. For seasonality, we're talking a bit here, like this is like, I just got the first like batch of beautiful mission figs that are in prime season right now, and biting into them and having a sip of Zacapa. It's one of the most magical combinations because you connect it, right? You're like, I heard there's that fig aroma in Zacapa, and you know that it's there, and then to bite like the most perfectly in season fig and have that with your Zacapa and then amplifying it in old fashioned was just a way that I found to extend that season for myself. And, I think it's hard when you can't get a lot of these ingredients all the time. So for putting something on the menu, I think we sometimes struggle with like, oh no, it's the season, so what are we gonna do? But I highly recommend right now, if you have some figs, get them, play with them. Another way that I've worked with them is infusing those into vermouth, so I can make then So I can make a Zacapa Manhattan with a fig infused with vermouth, or vermouth infused with fig. So there's just different ways to play around, but this was kind of one of those like foodie combination thoughts. I think we could be more creative in this drink of going outside of some of the aromatic bitters. I think some of the bitters that you have with bitter slang can really pump up some of the fruit notes here. And I think sometimes I know for sure I overreach for aromatics bitters, and I'm like, oh, I really should jump outside of that and think of other aromas I want to play around with. So I say, you know, if you have a really great, you know, template you already have for an old fashioned, try switching out bitters, try switching out the sugars, and just see how it changes so slightly from those different things. And for here, I also like not, you know, that I'm getting my sweetness with the fruit as opposed to adding the fruit element other ways. You know, I've seen some big bitters, but they didn't bring in much fruit aroma the way I wanted it. But then in that same style of ripe, rich fruit notes with Edición Negra, I found that it really plays with Mediterranean flavors. So things like date syrup. And I put like a teaspoon here because it's such a rich, thick, could be overpowering ingredient. But again, it brings a sugar note. To me, it brings in a little bit more of that kind of molasses note again that you get in rum. So like the date syrup, sometimes you'll see they call it date molasses just because it's a richer syrup. But that really, to me, brings out a lot of the ripe fruit notes, some of the different kind of sugar notes, because dates have that, like when you bite into a date, you taste brown sugar in a different style of way. And then again here, this is just a simple twist, really playing in with the Edición Negra and the kind of smoky notes. So I would love this with some Mediterranean food.
Well, it's amazing. And I mean, Lynnette has covered so much. I think it's really important that, you know, when you're looking at a way to take something so simple like an old fashioned, it is easy to mess it up. You know, if you don't put the right proportion of sweetener, the right proportion of spirit, the right proportion of bitters, maybe you stir it too long or not long enough. And so, you know, oftentimes mastering that really, really simple drink does take some finesse, but it also, you know, becomes like this breeding ground for really cool creativity, depending on how you feel, or perhaps the season, or, you know, the venue direction or concept. And this is one that that I developed that I was absolutely in love with, and it was related to a lot of the ingredients and the flavors that I had experienced when I traveled to not just Guatemala, but also to Central America. And, you know, Lorena, although, you know, from Nicaragua and now is part of the family here in Guatemala, it's just really interesting how similar some of the flavors are, and, you know, like subtle differences, but the climate across all of these countries just creates so many incredible ingredients. And even the sugar, I mean, coming from the Demerara River Valley in, you know, the northern part of South America is just so interesting. But we called this the FINCAS Old Fashioned. This was part of our Zacapa new collection of cocktails that we were doing globally. And, you know, in order to really champion one of the flavors that I really love and Lorena really loves within Zacapa is coffee. And rather than, you know, using a coffee liqueur or, you know, perhaps making an espresso shot and mixing it with sugar, we were taking the subtlety of really good, beautiful coffee that was already quite floral and nutty and just lovely to begin with, and grinding that to a part of like 100 grams. What is 100 grams in the measurements in the US? I would say, let's say somewhere 3.5 ounces of ground Guatemalan coffee. Now, again, if you can choose whatever coffee you like for this, and then pack that to 4 parts water. So let's call that about 16 ounces of water, and let that sit overnight. And then the next day we had this incredible concentrate when we strained that. And that was the liquid portion that we used to 1 part sugar. Now you can use white sugar, you can use honey, date syrup, Demerara sugar, the sticky, beautiful black sugar from South America is amazing here. Chocolate bitters, again, following suit to Julio Cabrera and also to Lynnette. Like, it's just such a perfect pairing. And then grapefruit peel. This is, you know, oftentimes if you ask Lorena what one of her favorite flavors is within Zacapa, that is sort of, you know, can be overlooked sometimes or surprising, she always says grapefruit. And I think it's really, really cool. So even just at the very least, the next time you make an old fashioned with Zacapa, or really any drink with Zacapa, just try, instead of reaching for the automatic lemon or orange twist, try and reach for a grapefruit peel to really see how that oil really expresses differently. And then what we did here is we have, you know, the applewood chips or cinnamon bark I also like. It's nice to see that Lynnette and I are always going in the same direction. But smoking this. Now, this is a really fancy contraption. This is, you know, our friend Charles, he owns a craft house, and this is his smoking box that he makes. And so it's such an easy and beautiful showpiece. You know, if you're at a bar, that there's a door on either side, so you can smoke it and then bring it to the table or set it on the bar. And you just open the back door to put the drink in, and then close it up, and then the guest can open it on the other side. So it's always like a really nice ritual to change, I guess, that subtlety of having maybe an old fashioned. You can do that with anything. But if you don't have access to that, you can always just put like a small cloche over top, like a glass dome, like a cake dome, or even a bowl. It doesn't even have to be fancy, and smoke it that way. And we just left it for about 15 seconds, and it just gave this incredible flavor profile, similar to that Edición Negra, where it gives that subtlety of smoke that really opens things up.
We have a question here from Jorge,
Yep.
Who wants to know, and I'll ask you first and then I'll answer. If you have only one flavor to pair with Zacapa, what would it be and why?
For me, it's always coffee. Because I am such a lover of coffee, and how coffee changes depending on where in the world you are. The beans always taste different. The way you brew it, the ritual changes. And so to me, it pairs so perfectly with Zacapa, but also I sort of like to take bits of the ritual of drinking coffee from different parts of the world and sort of bring that into Zacapa to sort of create new rituals with drinking rum.
Well, I would have to pick sherry, because I think if I had one way to go with that, is that I can change up the proportions of all the different ways that I have Zacapa with sherry, because I love amplifying that Oloroso note and that PX note in Zacapa, because I find it to be such a beautiful aroma. And then just a couple of notes from our groups over here. You know, definitely Zacapa can lead. You can use savory notes like celery bitters, and it holds up. Again, and we talked about the structure earlier of how many different, you know, flavor components, you know, come from the wood itself. There are so many more other notes and pairings that come out of that when the chemical breakdown of the actual spirit is done. And you'll find that it goes with savory things. Like, I think I saw like the flavor wheel that we had one time, and tomato was one that comes out. That tomato is like a subtle back note somewhere in Zacapa. You can find that, but like that floral tomato. And so celery bitters would be great. So I think playing around with savory things with Zacapa is a great way to try as well.
The tomato's a good shout, actually, because when you sun dry the tomato, it becomes like the richest umami bomb. And you can really, you can use sun-dried tomatoes with Zacapa, and it's pretty exceptional. So even like Lynnette said earlier, if you take like a red vermouth, maybe like a really light orangey red vermouth or something, and then, you know, put some sun-dried tomato in there, that could be a really interesting style Manhattan or Martinez. That could be really cool. Tomatoes, I'm all over it. Great comments coming in as well about the lavender and savory character of different things. Guinness syrup, that's fun.
Oh,
I love that.
Well, yeah, I do the Guinness and Zacapa is one of my favorite pairings. Like if I'm in a place where I'm like, all right, I can get a pint of Guinness and I want a little sidecar, I'm like, I'll have a pour of Zacapa and my Guinness, and it brings out that coffee note, and also some of those chocolate notes that I find that are both in there. And if you cook down the Guinness, it'll bring out more of the bitterness and some of those other aromas that go well.
Yeah, definitely. So the next cocktail, so we love the old fashioned, but I think it's also broadening your horizons to more stirred classic style drinks that really fit well with an oak matured spirit, and sometimes where a gin would have normally played the role as the base spirit. So if you try a Negroni, or you try, in this case, Martinez, and you put Zacapa in just in the same proportion, you have a really interesting experience and really changes the dynamic. I think Zacapa just really loves to be with aromatized wines and vermouths like sherry and so many other things, and liqueurs, just the subtlety. You don't have to add much to really create a brand new experience. So as you can probably tell, we're obsessed with clouds and things that look like clouds. It offers a really cool opportunity to bring some magic, and we love talking about Zacapa and how it relates to magic, because there's something magical that happens when Lorena starts to blend. It's not anything I could ever do, and you know, we as bartenders and chefs, we are blend from way, but how Lorena is blending those flavors together, it's really pure magic. And so in this case, we named this cocktail the XELA COUPE, and XELA being the short form for the town of Quezaltenango, which is where the house above the clouds is. And as you might remember, that's 2,300 meters above sea level, where our rums are sleeping in cask and then going through their Solera system into the final blend. And this, before we get into this, whatever insane thing is happening on the left with the pictures, we'll just talk quickly about the structure of the recipe. So I find as a bartender, I've always had great success when I find the classic cocktails and the classic designs, or, you know, Grace is on the call too, so she understands about the mother sauces. When you find the mother sauces in food and beverage that really work, and they, you know, they play to like your strengths, or they play to the ways that you like to build flavors, run with that. Use that as sort of like your first way of creating whatever that new creation is going to be, because you know that that recipe works. So in this case, the Martinez is one of my favorites. Normally comes with gin. So in this case, we're doing a straight swap of Zacapa 23 for gin. And we've got red vermouth, which is standard, same as the previous. And we've got cherry liqueur instead of maraschino, which is same as the standard. We've got orange bitters, which is same as the standard. But we're adding in Amontillado sherry, which is a medium dry sherry, which just adds a subtle touch of something. It's almost like when you're adding that perfect spice or salt and pepper to a dish, and then all of a sudden ingredients come to life. You're like, oh, I forgot that I put carrots in that dish. Now I can taste them. Maybe Grace agrees with me. Maybe I'm giving the carrots too much credit. So on top, so this is just a stirred Martinez, and you don't have to do any fancy business with the flavor blaster. You can just serve it as is, as you would a normal Martinez stirred beverage up in a coupe, and just, it's lovely. But what we did here is we played around with the presentation. So the flavor blaster, you can see in the top left, is an apparatus that was available here in Europe, and now it's widespread around the world. You should be able to go to Flavor Blaster and be able to get your own if you'd like one, or learn more about it. And it comes with you know, cartridges that either have flavors, or a clear cartridge where you can add your own flavors. So in this case, you know, this is alcohol free, this topping. And what we've done is we've added orange bitters directly into the clear cartridge. So as it starts to build this bubble on the outside, it sticks to the glass. And as you can see on the bottom, our bartender is getting ready to prick that bubble. And what happens is, on the right, is that bubble opens, and it doesn't leave any residue or stickiness of any kind. It just leaves a pure bubble and almost gasp of just amazing orange flavored mist. But it's, and anyway, it's dry, there's no moisture at all, but it's just, it was so amazing to be able to add, you know, the subtlety of whatever that cloud might be. But again, you can just have it as it was. So this was a really cool way to take something like a Manhattan, or, you know, a Vieux Carré, or, you know, a Martinez, and be able to adapt it to the flavors that you're looking for with Zacapa.
So I think it's interesting, just also to note here really quickly before we go back, is that things like, you know, the flavor blaster or using the smoking box add that extra theater and drama to the cocktails. I think especially right now, guests are excited to go out to see something that they can't do at home, right? So we're like, I'm not gonna make a flavor blaster myself. I'm probably not gonna smoke a cocktail. So I think when we invite guests back into our bars and restaurants, there is this point of elevating things, and we're elevating it with, one, the Zacapa. And I think what I always find is like the first time you give someone a Zacapa cocktail and they are blown away by, you know, even if it's something as like, I made them a Zagroni, and they're like, why is this so great? What did you do? And you're like, I put Zacapa 23. There's these just fun ways to think about how you can elevate your program. And so that way we can remember that right now
going out is about experiencing something exceptional. So that's really great. I see we have, and then when you smoke, there's a cup of drinks or smoke in general. Yes, I've used a lot of smoke. Oh, look, that's from you, Lauren. I think
You can
things like
answer, though.
Palo Santo or any of those aromatic woods are also really fun to play with. I think again, you know, I think Lauren's idea of looking at the cuisine or the style or regionality of how to amplify your drinks with that, you know, we're going to be getting in the season of like, you know, I think one of the things that I would like to smell at that is maybe some pine kind of aroma with Zacapa, because I think like, you know, if you can get like a beautiful burst of that kind of aroma, something green to contrast the beautiful sweetness, because there's also a floral note there. So there's lots of different ways to play around with, again, amplifying in very simple ways. And, you know, it doesn't have to be crazy fancy like at Lama San, you know, we're smoking Palo Santo, and people just seeing you wave like a smoking stick at the bar, and they're sitting and like the tables across the way, their eye goes to it, and then they ask the server, what was that cocktail that the bartender's making? So you can have that impact on the room with some of these techniques from afar as well.
Yeah, and changing the environment. You know, it doesn't have to be just in the pod where the guest is. It could be the overall, you know, atmosphere and environment of the bar and restaurant. You know, that is part of the ritual. But it's great things to think about how you can elevate and, you know, create a brand new experience for a guest that has been watching a lot of, you know, videos on how to make drinks over the last few months. And now we're coming in and hoping for, you know, a brand new experience of something else to think about, like making preserves. So
yeah, for those of you who are the high volume bars, we understand prep and trying to make the magic before your guests come in. That's an important part of the conversation. So we wanted to give you some tips and techniques.
Definitely. And, you know, we're in the, you know, the last of the summer right now. And if you're in North America and I'm in Northern Europe, we have roughly the same seasonality. So we are, you know, cherries have probably just left the scene, but we've got tomatoes and plums. We've got garlic. Well, you can figure out what you're going to do with the garlic, maybe black garlic, but there's peaches, nectarines, apricots. There's just so many things that are in season right now that we always want to try and preserve as much as we can. And it doesn't have to be for your whole menu. It's even just figuring out maybe one drink that has one thing that you preserved from the summer. And it doesn't have to be on your menu all year, but maybe if it's something that you can showcase for, you know, 1, 2, or 3 months, if you have enough, then that's really cool. And it helps you thinking 3 months ahead for some of the things that are coming in season. Now, what I've done here, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen just for a second, because I just want you to see some of the stuff. So I have some things here that I'm just going to show you because I'm always preserving things. And remember that whole story I told you about plums? Well, here they are. There's a lot of plums. And these ones, if you see them, they're amazing. These are the green gauge plums, and they're a little bit more sour, and they're not very ripe at the moment, which means they're perfect for making preserves. If you have the red ones too, they're great. But when they become a little bit softer, you have to add a bit more acid because they're just not as high in pectin. But we've got all kinds of stuff here. So before I go back in there, I just want to show you some of the things. So these rhubarb pickles, we made these back in May, and they're crunchy and lovely. And we just used like a Y vegetable peeler and just peeled the stalks and did a cold pickle on them. You know, you can do things like making ginger cordial. Doesn't even have to be things that, you know, you're finding at the farmer's market, but maybe you got a really good deal on ginger and you want to make something cool with a house-made ginger product. So with the green gauge, we ended up making this really cool juiced green gauge plum cordial thing for cocktails at home. Tapache, I'm sure every bartender on the planet has been making tapache the last few months, and of course that's made with pineapples. We did this with local strawberries, and we put beer in quotation marks because there's no barley or grains in this, but this is using a specific lactic fermentation to just take strawberries, water, and a little bit of sugar to activate with the starter. So it's been a really amazing, you know, few months of just coming together with different things. So we've got are strawberries. If you buy them when they're in season, you slice them, you dry them. And I'm going to show you one more thing, because there were many people writing that they were interested in this whole tomato situation. So we ended up getting really great tomatoes. And I know right now there are amazing tomatoes everywhere. So get the tomatoes. But when you end up dehydrating or oven drying the tomatoes, they become some of the most delicious and they smell incredible. Put those in the vermouth into your Zacapa Manhattan. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen again, otherwise we'll be here all night. So I just shared with you here a really simple plum preserves recipe. And again, you can either take a screenshot or when this goes online with Diageo Bar Academy, then you'll be able to use it. But what I did differently here, because also my husband is a chef and the two of us were always making preserves. We're always just trying to capture, you know, certain months of the year and hang on to it as long as possible. And preserves is a great way to do that. This one, I actually don't put a lot of sugar in the preserves because I feel like it just needs enough sugar to preserve it and bring out the flavor rather than making it sweet. You as the bartender should have the power to add the sweetener to your cocktail to balance, and it shouldn't have to just come from the preserves. That being said, if you have, you know, a type of jam or jelly that you're in love with and you want to work with that and it's a bit on the sweeter side, then just pull back the sugar in the recipe and add a bit more acid in your final cocktail and just put like a scoop of preserves in. So this, using the unripe plums, and as I mentioned here, don't worry if you have really ripe plums, you can use that as well. Plums, water, sugar, and added Zacapa. So this, the Zacapa, as you can see here in the method, we added this towards the end of cooking. So once we determined that the thickness and the pectin and the setting of the fruit was right, then we added the rum, stirred it all in, then packed them into sterilized jars and processed them for 5 minutes on a rolling boil. And that will keep up to 9 months. So that's kind of a great way to look at fruit. And we used to have like citrus peeling parties. We used to, my poor staff, we used to have them come in and we would just peel through cases of citrus. We'd use the pulp, the skins, the juice. We'd use every part of the citrus to do different and interesting things, but it added just that one element of something interesting to the cocktail program for one cocktail for maybe 6 months. And that's a great way to look at it. And the other opportunities as well. I mean, there are great books, like for example, this one, an amazing book. If you can see my screen, I'm not sure if you can, sorry, my video. And then this one, I mean, this one I think is from like 1975. It's like the Time Life Preserving book. I bet you Lynnette is getting up to get her book because she has the same one. Okay, that was unplanned, by the way. But these books, I mean, these books are amazing. You think, oh, they look kind of ratty. I should like learn how to make this from like Noma. And you could. They give you some cool recipes for making preserves. But I mean, these old school 1970, yeah, that's amazing.
One too. These are like I also go to the ones for the pickling as well. But yeah, finding some of the old books I think is good, because I know not all of us have access to all the fanciest machines, right? Like if you're really lucky to be working in a restaurant where chef has everything, that's really cool. It's amazing. But if you don't have those things, it doesn't mean that your bar can't be also at using these techniques. So these break them down in ways that are quite simple for you to do it as well. So I'm super stoked that you have that book.
Listen, it's old school. I mean, everyone's got a pot. That's all you need, a pot. So here are the other opportunities here. So fermentation, if you have experience with fermentation, then absolutely go for it. If it's something you'd like to learn how to do, there are so many YouTube videos on how to do lactic or acetic fermentation, which is incredibly easy. Maybe tune into the next session as well with Chef Grace and Mark, and perhaps they can go over some fermentation tips. But definitely like kombucha, fruit beers like the ones I showed you. Vinegar is really interesting. If you just, you know, you cover the jar with water, sugar, and whatever your ingredients are, like this as an example, and you just sort of let the fruit flies do their thing. You know, they come and investigate the cheesecloth on top, and eventually the liquid on the inside, you know, it will start to turn a little bit on the sour side like vinegar, and it's really, really interesting. You can make kimchi, all kinds of things.
And I do like that Chef Grace here has talked about, again, a savory way of working with Zacapa with garlic, ginger, honey, and Zacapa for that nice, and it does. It's like you kind of can, I love when savory things go with Zacapa because it's so unexpected. But that's really great to make yourself toddies. And I think a lot of these ways, like I want that plum, and like I like fortifying it with the Zacapa as well, because I think that is a really great way of, you know, keeping them longer, you know, and that's, I think when we're all thinking about that. So it is great for right now, especially. So, you know, ask your bars, your chefs. I'm sure they can pull, like, ask what's in season. Some of these things are gonna be really fleeting seasons. So I love that I could keep a drink on for the next 3 or 4 months by buying something, preserving it, and then having my Zacapa. Like right now would be my fig preserve time. Make my fig preserves, and I can have my Zacapa big old fashioned right through the times when you actually want it, because, you know, they're ripe now, but people start thinking about those flavors as we get towards like Christmas. So it's like, but then you're like, oh, figs aren't in season anymore, or they have to travel really far away. So it also helps you be more sustainable as well.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just, you know, one of the best tips, I guess, you know, Jonathan, my husband, gave me. I said, what is your top tip for preserving the finest fruit of the summer? He said, put everything on a sheet pan and freeze it individually and then put it in bags. And I'm like, amazing. So even if you didn't want to preserve anything, you didn't want to even turn on your stove, just buying all the blueberries, the raspberries, the strawberries, gooseberries, whatever it is, washing them and then putting them out on a sheet pan or a baking tray, whatever fits in your freezer, and freezing it that way, and then putting it into, you know, Ziploc bags afterwards and storing them in the freezer for when you need them, when you can figure out what you want to do with them, works as well.
I didn't put this recipe in, but when you said peaches, I do like a peach julep with Zacapa. So again, if you had those frozen peaches, you can take them out, cook them down, make a beautiful peach syrup, and then do it in a julep style, which is another way. Like right now, while it's still like edge of summer, you can play around with peach or any of those fruits, and the julep is another really cool way of using Zacapa in simple whiskey, traditional whiskey drinks.
I'm just going to head over to the next screen in just a moment. I wanted to highlight one thing. I don't know if you noticed this or not, but crunchy fruits like pomelo. Doing a sweet and sour pickle on pomelo, if you can find them in the grocery store or in the market, you know, they might not, maybe they grow in California and Florida, I'm not sure, but when they come in, when they are in season and they're imported in, they are these big, beautiful, you know, one of the original citrus fruit, where it feels like grapefruit kind of stemmed from there, and maybe yuzu kind of stemmed from there, but they're huge and amazing. And they're not terribly juicy, but the peels, you can stick them in sugar and make an oleosaccharum from them. And it's absolutely delicious, but the flesh is really crunchy. And if you cut that up into slices and then put that into a sweet and sour pickle brine with whatever spices you like, oh my God. So you can use like the actual flesh, and once it's finished, use that. But then you can use that leftover pickling liquid for a pomelo, you know, type drinking vinegar or something that you can use in place of lemon or lime juice in a cocktail in the fall, which could be really cool.
So we're gonna finish up with one of my favorite things, which is shrubs. And we can go to the next slide. And we have like a very simple, awesome Zacapa inspired cocktail, shot by Shannon Sturgis, of course, because it's beautiful. But this was kind of where I'm always like, you know, I think one of the ways is freezing, but some other times when I get too much of one fruit, I just toss it in vinegar and make my shrubs. And like Lauren with making preserves, you don't need a lot of sugar. So I know a lot of recipes out there will tell you like coat the fruit in a cup of sugar. Don't do that. I like to let the fruit itself macerate into the vinegar. And you can choose the different acid that you want, whether champagne vinegars, think they're a little more delicate and light. If you want something more aggressive, like an apple cider vinegar. I love using sherry vinegar when thinking of things for Zacapa with maybe more red fruits, because that's going to also amplify that. But in this one, a very simple blueberry shrub that you're able to make. I think on the next slide, we have the actual shrub recipe, but the cocktail here is built with things like lavender honey and flavor combinations that I've learned from chefs
Oh,
You can
sorry.
use that, no worries, you can just very easily toss those blueberries into a mason jar, put the vinegar in there, and then I like to heat it slightly once I feel like the fruit flavor's there, but never let it go to a rolling boil, and then add my sweetener, whether it's going to be honey or granulated sugar or something. But that's a nice way of controlling, just so you don't have to put too much sugar into these. But then again, this lovely cocktail, just brings out, the lavender honey, amplifying a lot of those floral, but then all those nice, beautiful round notes of sweetness in Zacapa, and then the blueberry shrub bringing acidity to this drink as well. So really fresh, really bright things for you to play around with. So
Sounds delicious.
yeah, and we'll get you guys, you can see the recipes here, but very simple. Like, it does take a couple days. It's probably like I gave you like the laziest way to make a shrub, because like, to me, it shouldn't be very hard. It's like, wake up, shake it up, check it out later.
Amazing.
Right. Being good, so that we like nailed our presentation in the right time. So if anyone has any other questions, we're happy to talk with them. And we're gonna be really excited to check out on September 14th. Chef Grace Ramirez, who reminded me how delicious goat cheese bruschetta is with all those fig cocktails, the fig fashion that I'm gonna have. Grace has been a part of our family for a few years now, and her passion for bringing Latin cuisine to the world, and in a way that is very, I think it's kind of the same way, right? Like, Zacapa is a rum that is universal, and it just shows that like these beautiful ingredients that come from Latin America are actually very versatile and have a broad, beautiful world and place in culinary cuisine. And Grace does that with her cooking, and Lorena does that with her beautiful rum. And we'll be joined with, you'll be joined with Lauren's counterpart, her global counterpart, Mark. So Laura can tell you a little bit about Mark Moriarty, but it's going to be a great session. So please tune in on the 14th as well.
Yeah, Mark is lovely. I think him and Grace have done some work together over the years, and it's really fun if you get to be, well, you don't want to be a fly on the wall. You want to be there eating, definitely. Mark Moriarty is the San Pellegrino Young Chef of the Year. He's the sous chef at the 2 Michelin star restaurant in Dublin called The Greenhouse, and he's been part of our Diageo family as our chef in residence for the last couple of years, and I'm delighted that I get to work with him. I don't get to work with Grace that often, so I'm happy that all of us are together working on this project together. And of course, Lorena Vasquez. I just wanted to maybe open it up if Grace and Lorena wanted to say anything before we head off. It's a wonderful pleasure to have you both here.
I just wanted to say you guys are amazing, and I'm so proud of you all, and it's a pleasure just to be here listening. And I always get excited just to talk about flavor profiles, just because every time you guys talk about cocktails, I think about food. So I'm very excited about the next session, but you ladies are amazing, and it's always such a pleasure just to see your shining faces and hear you ladies speak. I love the preserves. I'm a big preserver. I've been preserving, like I said, like garlic, ginger, and honey and Zacapa, and it's amazing. I have it with tea. I have it with everything. So it's great to hear you all.
Thanks, Grace. Nice to see you. And Lorena, for the final word.
I'm hungry. Okay, I have my papa and the chocolate. Yeah.
Perfect.
No, it's a great presentation.
Thank you, Lorena. And thank you, Lynnette,
for
so
me,
much.
it's a pleasure.
Thank you for making such beautiful rum and like pouring your heart and soul into it for us to be able to use and share with everyone. And, thank you, Lynnette, for today. Always a pleasure to do work with you, and you're so brilliant. And I can't wait for the next session with Mark and Grace. I think it's going to be amazing. And for everyone that's tuning in today, thank you very much. I know we started a couple of minutes late, but appreciate you hanging in there with us. I think we're on 60 minutes on the nose. And a reminder that you can download all of these programs, including the recording and the slides that we shared today and from the previous session on Diageo Bar Academy. We've got, well, I don't personally, but somebody out there from Zacapa has your email, so we will let you know when that's available. But otherwise, we wish you wonderful drinks with Zacapa. Remember to have it with people you love, have it with a bit of food, and cheers, everybody. Thank you so much for joining.
Right, salud.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending this presentation.